Hello. Hello. Hi, welcome everyone. Hopefully I can be heard on the Zoom also. Let's see if people are giving some thumbs up. And that happens. Great, okay. Welcome everyone. Really just delighted, thrilled that you're all here and that particular Omdim Beyachad, Standing Together, is here for what I think is going to be a really good conversation that hopefully is a conversation that starts more conversations and not just one conversation. You've read a little bit about Omdim Beyachad before you came here, presumably, which is why you're here. But just to remind you, grassroots organizations and movements, we all know, have the power to drive social, political, and economic change and shape history. As people worldwide are gathering to fight for justice and social change, leading Israeli grassroots movement Omdim Beyachad, which means standing together, mobilizes Jewish and Palestinian citizens to pursue peace, equality, social, and climate justice. Omdim Beyachad understands that occupation and inequality are linked, and that both create division where there could be and should be shared purpose, and it dampens any effort towards change. But Omdim Beyachad was founded under the belief that when people can stand together, they can fundamentally alter the existing socio-political reality and bring about the future that the majority of citizens do want to see, with peace and independence for Israelis and Palestinians, full equality for all citizens, and true social, economic, and environmental justice. Omdim Beyachad's motto is one I think we could all get behind: where there is struggle, there is hope. So who are our speakers for tonight? We have Sally Abed, who is a Palestinian activist and an elected national leader at Omdim Beyachad. In recent years, she has become a prominent progressive Palestinian voice in Israel. She is a recurring guest on the Promise podcast and the co-host of a new podcast, Groundwork, a mini-series co-sponsored by the New Israel Fund about Palestinians and Jews refusing to accept the status quo and working together for change. So thank you, Sally, for being here, for coming all this way. Are you on? Did you flip the switch? I think so. All right. And next to Sally is Alon-Lee Green, who is the national director and a founding member of Omdim Beyachad, the Jewish Arab grassroots movement that we just heard about, mobilizing around issues of peace, equality, and social justice, also environmental justice. Got his start organizing Israel's first trade union of waiters in a chain of coffee shops, and went on to found Israel's first national waiters union. Alon-Lee emerged as a prominent leader of Israel's social protest movement in the summer of 2011, and subsequently served as a political advisor in the Knesset, Israel's parliament. You may have heard Alon-Lee speak last year on Zoom, and we're thrilled to have you back, Alon-Lee. And with that, we are here, as we know, also in partnership with the New Israel Fund. And just to hear a little bit about that partnership and about the New Israel Fund is Tali Herskowitz.
Should I stand here?
Yes.
A little awkward, but thank you, and thank you everyone for being here, especially the teenager group. We're so happy that you're here. And please ask questions when we get to the Q&A, because we really do want to hear from you. So, as Rabbi Crowley said, I am Tali Herskowitz. I'm the regional director for the New Israel Fund in Washington, D.C., and I have my notes because this is the first time I'm doing this in over 2 years. And we're really excited. I'd like to thank Rabbi Crowley and our friends at Temple Micah for hosting tonight's event. Temple Micah has been a long-time ally and friend of the New Israel Fund, and I really can't think of a more appropriate and suitable venue to host our first public program in over 2 years, and I hope first of many, that we just continue feeling safe, gathering, and doing things in person. For those of you who are not familiar with the New Israel Fund, and I do see some familiar faces, we are the leading organization advancing and defending democracy and democratic values in Israel. Since NIF was founded over 40 years ago, it has been at the front line of social change and social justice in Israel, supporting and assisting activists and organizations working on the ground to address the most pressing issues facing Israeli society. organizations like Omdim Beyachad, who you're going to hear from today. We are a partnership of Israelis and supporters of Israel worldwide, committed to the vision of Israel as a true democracy that grants full equality and rights to all its citizens and to protecting the rights of people living under Israel's control. For all of you who do support the New Israel Fund, I want to thank you for making this work possible. And if you would like to read more about NAF, please pick up the brochure on the way out. And also don't hesitate to come talk to me after the event. I will pass along during the Q&A a registration page if you want to kind of sign up to our mailing list. We'll combine it with Standing Together so you won't have to write your name twice. So if you would, you're not forced to, but if you would like to hear from us and from Standing Together, please add your name to our mailing list. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Alon-Lee and Sally, for coming to DC. It's been a pleasure, and I can't wait to hear from you again.
Thanks, Tali. So we heard your biographies, but why don't we just start with both of you telling us a little bit about yourself. What led you here? What led you to your activism? What led you to Omdim Beyachad? Let's start with Sally, and then we'll go to you, Alon-Lee.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sally Abed. I'm 30 years old. I grew up in Maalia, a small town in the Western Galilee, a Palestinian town in the Western Galilee. And I grew up to a working class family that really, because we were a working class, my parents actually both work for governmental institutions. So we were, let's say, one of the better situation Arabs in Israel. And for that, I think a lot of us have been not really engaging in politics. I think a lot of Palestinians, like my parents and like my family and like my environment, have been deeply depoliticized, also as Palestinians, but also as Israeli citizens. We don't feel like we have a space to actually advance things that we want to advance that are beyond the fact that we are discriminated against minority, or that our struggle for civic equality, but the fact that I am a woman and I am I'm worried about climate crisis, and I really don't have accessible transportation from my town to go to work. The fact that I can't afford a house, like, ever. Like, there's no possibility for me to afford a house with the way that I earn a wage in Israel and the prices of housing, and the fact that I pay 1/3 of my wage on rent. These are things that really concern me as a citizen. And of course, I also have the very complex reality of living as a Palestinian in Israel and having to navigate my narrative and my story and my identity and what part it takes in Israeli society. And so really, I did not have, like many Palestinian youth, I did not have that politicizing environment. And I actually came to the US to study here. I finished a degree in economics at Earlham College. It's a Quaker school in Richmond, Indiana. And as Quakers do, I was really, I went through a very intense experience. I was like, wow, there's so much more to my, to me as a person, as an activist, as a citizen, as an Israeli, as a Palestinian, as a woman, as there's so much as a global citizen. There's so much for me to do, and I really, I feel like it really expanded my horizons in a way that I never had the opportunity to do in Israel. And then 4 years came by. I finished in 2015. I graduated and I came back. I moved to Tel Aviv, like many young people, and I started working, and I got slapped in the face. I really was slapped in the face. I was very disappointed in the lack of space for really most youth in Israel to actually be engaged um, in any kind of work, in any kind of activism, in any kind of work that could, advance our aspirations, our real lives as people. And then the only space that I could be engaged in, which was also very limited, was a very kind of conditional partnership of being an Arab and being confined to advancing equal civic rights and nothing beyond that. It was very, very important, but also I felt like I wasn't part of society. I was just part of this minority that was kind of like on the side, and I just had, at the best case scenario, I received solidarity, which is very powerful, but then I didn't feel like I'm part of Israeli society. And I remember in 2017, 2018, there were there was a campaign against the deportation of asylum seekers in southern Tel Aviv. There were 80,000 asylum seekers from Africa, from Sudan and from Eritrea in southern Tel Aviv, and they were about to be deported. And Standing Together, which I wasn't part of yet, has led a massive mobilization for months that actually, it really came to, tens of thousands of people, in southern Tel Aviv against the deportation, which actually worked. They actually halted the deportation of 80,000 asylum seekers. And I remember I looked at that and I was there and I saw signs in Arabic and in Hebrew about something that didn't have to do with the occupation or with me as a Palestinian. And I remember that really, it lit a bulb for me. I was like, wow, like this is something that is, that's where I saw my horizon. It's meant that, oh, there is a space. There is a space beyond for us to actually build a majority that is not, confined to the binary Arab-Jewish, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, religious and secular, but actually a new kind of majority of people, the majority of the people that live in Israel. And I think that really was when I was like, okay, I'm going to follow this movement and see what they do. And really, Standing Together has been, so relevant to so many people on local levels. We have local chapters and on national levels, and it has been very impactful and reactive and reframing the discourse and the conversation and creating such unlikely alliances that, it really intrigued me. And come 2018, the nation-state law was passed. And I remember I would say, at least, a very hostile work environment. I was called for a hearing by my manager because I very casually said, oh, in our Palestinian society, I don't even remember what I said, but it was very casual. I just referred to my society as Palestinian, and it was, very hostile for them, which means it was very hostile for me. And I remember during that time, the nation-state law passed, and I was devastated. And I remember I actually saw this amazing event on Facebook, Very Purple, come to the largest Arabic lesson at Habima, which is on Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv, which was 10 minutes walk from my office. So I left early and I went to Habima, and I saw just so many Arabs and Jews actually standing there demanding equality. And the Jewish people that were there, they are ones who also were at the asylum seeker, against the deportation of asylum seekers protest, and they were the ones that were, also going through LGBTQ rights rallies, and they were the ones that are doing really we have been mobilized under the deep understanding that equality for Arabs is so much beyond civic equality for the Arab Palestinians in Israel, but really the interconnectedness of the struggles and of equality and social justice in Israel. And that was so powerful for me. And the rest of history, really, I think that same day I joined the movement. And since then, I have been very lucky to also be part of the leadership of Standing Together. It has been a little bit over 4 years. And yeah, we will talk more about it, but that's how I got to Standing Together. It's a long story, but it's really, I think, gives a lot of why it is important to have the movement and build it.
Hi. So, my name is Alon-Lee. I'm 34 years old. I'm originally from Tel Aviv. I'm still living there. Sally said it's a bit rare because most of the people that are born in Tel Aviv, somehow, I don't know where they go, but they find themselves raising their kids outside of Tel Aviv. I still don't have kids, but I hope to raise them in Tel Aviv, even though it became to be the most expensive city in the world. It was declared just a few months ago. I mean, it's tough to survive there. I'll try to think of, or to tell you a bit about myself and how I think it's connected to Standing Together, maybe. So, and some stops in my life that led me to be one of the group that founded the movement, and still believing with all my heart in the change that we're trying to create. So I grew up in Tel Aviv, in a very elitist and very rich neighborhood in center Tel Aviv, but my mom wasn't rich. My mom is a single parent, and she had twins, me and my twin brother. And we had my grandmother, and that's all my family. And I remember my mom really insisting living where she grew up. She's like living 5 minutes from my grandmother, which is still living over there. And she insisted to live in Tel Aviv and live next where she can get support from her mother. And she sent us to the school, which was a school for rich children. And I remember all my childhood feeling that it ain't right. It's not fair to be a kid that has no control over his life, and growing up among very other rich kids. And I remember one day, the first year when we were sent to the yearly trip for 2 days, one night in Eilat. It's a southern, that Red Sea city in the south of Israel. And I remember the day before the yearly trip, my teacher, Michal, she called my name and she said, if your mom will not pay the trip fees until tomorrow morning, you're not going on the bus. And I remember, like, it's really a very vivid memory for me, because I remember I focused my eyes like a tunnel on her eyes, and I knew that everyone is actually looking at me, but I didn't want to look to the sides and to admit it, and I just kept on looking at her, and I felt very much ashamed and embarrassed by that. And I think it was, if I at least remember it as something that shaped me as a critical person, as a person that feels it's not fair and it shouldn't be like that, and something needs to be done, but I didn't know what to do. A few years later, I had to go to work and to help a bit at home. And in my last high school year, I started working in a big coffee chain. It's actually an American one, the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf. It came to Israel. It was one of the first coffee shop chains in Israel, and I started working in a branch next to my home. Really quickly to discover that the rules that they needed, like the law that they needed to apply, working law, were not, existing there. I worked on Saturdays, but I didn't get paid for Saturday extra payment. I worked extra hours. I didn't get paid for extra hours. I was supposed to get rides payment. We didn't get it. The tips that the customers left for the workers was actually put in the safe and then deposit in the bank account of the chain. And I remember coming to the manager or the director of this branch, asking him, okay, I got my first pay slip, where are all the payments I should receive? And he said, listen, that's how it is in here. If you don't like it, there's a coffee shop across the street, or another one over there. You can go and work in a different place. And I chose not to. I felt like I should get what I deserve. It's not a privilege, it's just a law. So I started working and talking with my colleagues there. I was 17, turning 18, and most of them were like not high school students, they were older than me. But we decided to unionize, to form a union, to not only go to the workers of my branch, but to actually go to all the 14 branches across Israel and to form a union. But I got fired because of that. They recognized that I'm leading the attempt to unionize, and they told me, listen, it's a private sector. You cannot unionize in private business, which is not true. But they fired me. We took them to court. I was brought back by court's order to work there. It's not the most pleasant thing to work in a place where you just got fired. But we led a strike. We went on a strike for 6 weeks, and we won. We didn't only form the first waiters union in Israel, but we signed the first collective agreement of young workers in Israel, what became a presidential agreement. And the owner of the American chain flew all the way to Israel, told the CEO of the Israeli company, step aside, I'm signing the agreement with them. And I think that taught me the lesson that nothing will change unless you will try to change it, but you also have the power to change it. If you try, if you struggle, if you try to change your reality, you may succeed, and you may actually change your life and the reality of others. And I think that was something that brought me to a place where I understood I can have this power, but it also depends on other people, on working and organizing together with other people. And a few years later, I was part of the social protest of Israel. It was the equivalent protest of Occupy Wall Street, the 2011 protest wave in the Western and Arab world, the Arab Spring, then Indignados in Spain. Israel's protest was the largest in proportion in percentage of the population. At one night in Israel, we had 500,000 people marching in the streets, which, if you will think about how many Americans means in the streets in one night, it's around 23 million Americans protesting at one event. It's a lot. And I remember that in this social protest, which I was one of the leaders of, at the beginning, the first march, it wasn't that big then, but we didn't have the slogan of the march. And one young Arab lawyer, I was already active also in struggles against occupation and for equality between Jews and Arabs in Israel, and a friend of mine, a young Arab lawyer, came to us and he said in Egypt, they started the protest a few months before, and they shout, El Shab Yurid Adala Ijtimaiya. The people demand social justice. Ha'am Doresh Tzedek חברתי. We looked at each other and we started shouting this, and the walls really echoed the slogan, and it was a very powerful one. This young lawyer, by the way, is now the head of the joint list, Ayman Odeh. But what was super special about this slogan, it's that it's the first time that we used the word Ha'am, the people, not as the Jewish people, not as the Arab people, but the people of Israel, the people that is living in Israel and is the subject of the Israeli democracy, the people that demand change for the majority and understand that there's a small minority that actually benefits from the reality as it is today. And I think that planted the seed of what became Standing Together a few years after, because that's the kind of core of our politics, understanding that we can find a common interest of Israelis, Palestinian, and Jewish citizens of Israel. We can find a common interest, a shared interest, and we can unite people around this interest and isolate the ones that are actually benefiting from the current reality, instead of them actually trying to divide us by nations or by Haredi and secular Ashkenazi and Mizrahi. And I think the second lesson that we understood out of the social protest is that we managed to mobilize so many people out of the street, but those people came back home and they were like thrilled. It was like a cosmic moment in Israel. We felt like we're gonna win. We have 500,000 people in the street. Of course the reality is going to change. Of course we're gonna win. It was a moment of hope. But then people went back home and it shattered. People went into despair. My generation left to Berlin, left to New York, left to London. Young people decided they cannot stay and build their life in Israel because it's all getting more corrupt and more expensive, and there's no horizon of peace, and the security problem in Israel is so scary that you can go in the street and get stabbed, or you can go and be recruited as a soldier and do crimes that you don't want your children to do, and everything is stuck. And I think the lesson that we understood is that mobilizing is not enough. We need to organize. We were lacking the vessel to actually bring all this energy that we created into something that is sustainable to take every weekend hundreds of thousands of people to the street and think that will be enough. We need to absorb the energy. We need to translate the energy into political change. And that's the organizational lesson that we learned about what we need, what needs to be done. And that's why we also build Standing Together. And I would be happy to share more, but I think that's enough.
I mean, that is where I'm curious about, because I think both of you spoke about sort of, ironically, standing together is not enough, right? The solidarity is not enough. Going to a protest is not enough. How do you look at actually making change? Like, what does that look like when you sort of come down from the mountain and there's been some of that shattering? What are you doing to make real policy change, to make things sustainable, to build leadership, all of those things?
So maybe I'll talk a little bit about our structure, and then maybe Alon-Lee, you can speak about like a campaign that we do, and then how to demonstrate how we actually do it. So we are a movement, a democratic movement. We basically have around a little bit over 3,200 monthly sustaining members. It seems a lot, little, but it actually is a lot for Israel, and especially Israeli left. We actually are the largest grassroots movement, and we happen to be a Jewish Arab movement. So it really is. We have really been situated as a leading movement within the peace building and shared society, but we really have also situated ourselves as a leader in social and economic issues as well. Standing Together has 8 local chapters in addition to student chapters, 7 student chapters on campuses. So the way that we do it is that we organize people locally as well as nationally. Locally, we organize people through community organizing, through leadership development. We actually we have a lot to learn from the US. The Israeli left doesn't really have the tradition of community organizing, and we are actually developing methods and importing methods of how to develop leaderships, local leaderships that can multiply our effect. Our local chapters, obviously, they are communities. We understand that going into just protest is not enough. We also know that standing together in solidarity and talking about how similar we are is also not enough, but we actually train people, we politicize people, we build leaderships that can actually go and recruit more people and can actually expand our local activities, and that's how we're growing. It's a multiplier factor, really. And we do that with an amazing organizing team throughout the country that is working a lot. We talk to people, we are on the streets, we are online, we have amazing online platforms and newsletter. We actually have an alternative media platform. We have an Arabic and an Hebrew podcasts that really provides a different frame to what happens, to things that are happening in Israel. We actually try to challenge the way that things are divided at the moment. We try to reorganize and isolate things differently, with us being the majority of the people. And we do that through campaigns, through actual demands that we do. And maybe Alon-Lee, you can talk a little bit about our minimum wage campaign that we have been leading. Do you want to talk about that? So we can demonstrate how do we actually build power through campaigns, through social campaigns.
So our main goal in standing together is to build a new majority in the Israeli society, one that is not combined by one nation or one, sector of the Israeli society, but to reimagine how we can build a majority that, combines a lot of different communities and puts, recreate the question of who is the us and who is the them in the Israeli politics. The us and them is the basic question of all politics. And I think the story of us and them in the Israeli society is being told by, the right wing, by bigotries, by people that are trying to frame this question as the chaste majority that feels like a minority, that is being chased by people that want to cancel the Jewish state, that want to take away your homes, that want to take away your jobs. People are coming from the outside, and the left, those are the ones that care more about the other, the Palestinians, the refugees, whomever, you know the story from here, then they care more about your own people. And what we're trying to do is to reframe this question and to talk about a very wide us, a very inclusive us, that is putting in one big us the majority of people, and is trying to say that them is actually the one that holds the power. They try to tell you that there's a scary enemy outside, that someone else is holding the power, but they hold the power. And so we pick campaigns and we pick like polarizing questions that we try to polarize on the right terms, such as the minimum wage campaign, because in Israel the costs of living are rising and rising and rising in ways that it's scary to think that every year it's 11%, the cost of housing is rising 11%. The cost
13.
of supermarket?
13.
13 this year, yeah. This year was not 11, 13. The costs in supermarkets are 4% every year, but the salaries have been stuck for 6 years already and they didn't go up. And actually because of COVID, a lot of people lost their jobs and had to start over. So we created a campaign demanding to raise the minimum wage from 29 shekels an hour, which is just a little less than $10, right? Yeah, to 40 shekels an hour, which is around $14. We call this campaign Minimum 40. And we understood that this very simple policy suggestion that to raise the minimum wage will not only benefit the lives of the almost 2 million people that are, which is almost half of the Israeli workforce that is making a minimum wage, but also it will take all the life
quality?
The life quality up and will serve it. And we actually said, who is preventing us from having a better life? Who is not allowing us to have the better salaries? It's actually the right wing that is portraying itself as the defender of the people. The one that is actually getting the votes of the lower income families and people, but they are the ones that don't want to hire the minimum wage. And this is one of the first times that we managed to break through and to create a very popular campaign, getting the support of more than 50 parliament members from the right wing and the left wing opposition and coalition. It's the first time that we have, we operate in ultra-Orthodox cities. We have WhatsApp groups of ultra-Orthodox women that are going to work and they get a minimum wage, and they are organizing within our campaign next to Palestinian citizens of Israel, which is like something you couldn't imagine possible even. And we create a campaign that is kind of portraying this new majority that we want to talk about and we want to create. So we choose these division lines and we try to create campaigns that are on the ground, in the media, and we also try to walk in the Knesset, in front of the government. And our aim is not, the front aim is to raise the minimum wage right now, for example. But we also try to expand the political imagination of people and to make it something. Think about that. One of our leading leaders of the campaign is an Arab activist leader in the movement. And when she goes to Channel 12, which is the main Hebrew channel of Israel, most of Israelis watch this at 8 news, and she sits there and she talks about raising your minimum wage because you deserve more. And it's not reasonable that you go to work every day, but you end the month without being able to pay your debts and rent, but you're Jewish. That breaks something. That is actually tackling racism from a different angle. It's not, no, 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 racism is bad. Don't hate Arabs because it's not moral. We don't speak about higher morals, but we create leadership and we create this understanding that we're in it together and we have a society, and this society needs to change. And I think that's like one of our strategies to create change in Israel. And I actually think we should also speak about what happened in last May, and the war we had, because it's also another way to understand how we try to not only do the solidarity work, because you do need to stand in solidarity with Palestinians living under occupation, under military control for more than 50 years. They've been controlled by Israeli soldiers that, you know, take away their freedom. But not only that we stand in solidarity, but we also talk about our interest of living in peace, our interest in living in security, our interest not to have terror attacks like we had today in Israel, where 4 people lost their lives. And I don't know how many hatred was created today, and how many people have, you know, lost their belief and hope in humanity, and in you know, believing that maybe life can be normal in Israel. So maybe May can be a good story.
Do you have like a...
I want to make sure, because you said a phrase that I want us to hold on to, which is expanding political animation. And I just think that that's a really, we should all be thinking about that. And I just want to appreciate that. And just to sort of entree into your question, I think there is a rule in community organizing that, at least that I was taught, which is no permanent allies and no permanent enemies. Which is to say that you can disagree about a lot of things, but if you have something to work towards, then you can sort of rise above that all, and that works to an extent, right? But a lot of times, people have a much easier time wrapping their head around the enemies piece and not around the allies piece. And so I'm curious, particularly with what happened last May with the violence and the war, what that looked like for your organization, and what it looked like to be organizing across disagreement, and to stay at the table together.
Last May was, you know, since we're kids, I think unfortunately, we are used to many cycles of violence. This is our reality, and not just, you know, what we see that is very close to us. And me growing up as a Palestinian also, we are hyper alert and hyper aware of what is happening, you know, in Gaza and in the West Bank. It is something that we live with. It's almost like a trauma that we are obviously not impacted by directly. We don't live under occupation. We are Israeli citizens, but it is something that, you know, so we go through that, and we interact within within Israeli society with that, you know, nettel, burden. Last May was it was the most traumatizing, painful events that I have ever experienced in my life of 30 years. And I live up north. I went through the Lebanese war in 2006. We went through 2014, 2015, you know, where you really can't even speak Arabic in the street. You really can't speak Arabic in the street. Like, you can't even answer the phone if your mom is calling. And I have the privilege of not looking immediately, not being recognized immediately as Palestinian, so others don't have that privilege. I think it didn't only create crisis within Israeli society, it created crisis within shared society and within the movement. I think we really, it's really hard to choose partnership in these situations. You know, I remember I live in Jaffa, which is south of Tel Aviv, part of Tel Aviv, a mixed city with a very impoverished Arab community, and there was a very very, very sharp, high level of intensity and of violence. Streets were on fire, literally, quite literally, streets were on fire. People were actually attacked. There were hate crimes from both sides. Very close to us, 15 minutes away from us in Lod, another mixed city, there were synagogues were lit on fire, mosques were lit on fire. There was actually a man who was shot dead. It was really hard to choose partnership. And I can't stress that enough because I really think it's very easy to create and imagine a majority when we talk about minimum wage, or when we talk about housing, or when we talk about even climate. But when we talk about the occupation, and when you talk about when there's war, then this polarization is just the polarizing force is just so powerful. And we're not naive to think that what we did in May was anything close to enough. But it was probably thanks to our work and to the fact that we were able to develop the political imaginations and to actually challenge our mindsets of this binary system, and actually challenge the likely alliances and who's aligned with who, and this, the sides. We were the closest that we have ever been in decades to actually, reach a point of, the solidarity that was shown on the streets. We were able to mobilize tens of thousands of people in the streets in Israel, Arabs and Jews in Israel, when there were sirens. People were really, protesters were hiding behind cars and behind trees, and then coming back to the protest. And that was something that was unprecedented, in a sense that we really felt, despite the crisis, we were able to actually overcome this polarization and provide an alternative space, an alternative conversation in a time where it was almost impossible to talk about these things. And this doesn't happen because we talk about, it doesn't only happen because we are in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem every week, or that we are in Walajin in East Jerusalem every week, or that we go to marches in south hills of Hebron every week, every once in a while, or that we talk about Arab-Jewish partnership. It happens because we actually organize people, we actually develop organizational capacity, and we actually create the type of leaderships, the type of political awareness that can challenge, the status quo exactly when it's almost impossible. And in Israel, it's almost impossible to challenge the status quo when there is war. The same thing is happening right now. We are here, but we really have been, in touch with our staff back home, and it's a crisis what's happening in the Negev, in the south right now. It really is, 4 people were killed yesterday. It is something we know that there's going to be a price, and standing together as a leading Arab-Jewish partnership will have to navigate through the complexities of, okay, how do we talk about this? How do we mobilize people? What is the message? How do we de-escalate? But not only de-escalate, but how do we grow stronger as a community, as a Jewish Arab community, locally as well in the Negev. We have a chapter there, we have a student chapter and a local chapter. How do we grow stronger from this? And it's only because we work relentlessly throughout. But do you want to talk more about, I think you should talk about May from your perspective as...
So I think for me it was closing a circle in a way, because the first public moment of standing together, when it wasn't even a movement, it was a name of an initiative, was in 2015, the end of the year, when the knifing intifada, loners intifada, you remember it was a moment, yet another moment of violent escalation where people started to get stabbed by Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and then in West Jerusalem. They went to Tel Aviv, and then Sheva, and Netanya, and Haifa, and all of a sudden it felt like there is like they called it an intifada, an uprising, a violent uprising, and then the reaction of the army was to go deeper into the Palestinian villages, to repress stronger the demonstration, the non-violent demonstration. And it just was like a circle of blood and fire and blood and casualties and wounded people. And it was a scary moment. And the first moment of standing together was when the group of people that founded the movement looked to the sides and saw that wherever we look, to the right and to the left, literally to the right and to the left, to the media or to the parliament members, all the voices are telling us that's how it is. Like, forever we will live on our sword. There's a Jewish saying, "L'olam nochal cheret." And the Prime Minister Netanyahu, he actually said, that's our life here in Israel. You need to get used to that, because forever we'll live on our sword, and that's the cost of life in Israel. And we said, no, we can't accept that. Even the left-wing parliament members are telling that's not the time to protest. Now there's a time of security problems, so we need to stand aside and look and back the government, even though they weren't in the government. So we started to mobilize around cities in Israel and to raise a voice. We felt at that moment that our only job is to raise a voice and bring Jews and Arabs, Palestinian and Jewish citizens of Israel together, and also Israelis and Palestinians. We had some cross-border events as well. And some thousands of people came to Jerusalem and to Tel Aviv in a very scary moment, and we felt we did something good. But then we worked since the end of 2015 until this event, and I think we were ready. Not that we want to be ready for that terrible moment, but we had built the infrastructure and the power and spread enough around the country, so we managed to mobilize tens of thousands of people. When the sirens and the rockets are falling on Gaza and falling on the south of Israel, it also went up north, and it was a very scary moment. And in all this darkness and all this blood around, where Arabs and Jews were turning against each other in their own mixed city, in their own neighborhood. Synagogues were lit on fire. People that spoke Arabic on buses were actually, violently attacked and were like almost killed. And one person was actually lynched and killed. And in this moment, we were managed to create a moment of hope, a moment of light, of people coming out to the streets with our call, saying we choose to stand together, we choose not to surrender to fear and hate, we choose not to accept this reality, and tens of thousands of people all across the country did something. Was it enough? Not yet. Is it something that will stop and prevent the next war? No, we need to continue working. But it showed us that we're on the right path of actually trying to create this space where people from different communities are coming together and they say, we are the people. It's not them against us or us against them, but we are the people that have the interest. It's not only about moralities, and it's not only about solidarity, it's we have the interest to live in a different reality, and I think it's very important.
I want to thank you both so much for all of this tonight. I think in a lot of our minds, there could not be a more entrenched political identity than Arabs and Jews, Jews and Palestinians, Israelis and Palestinians. And to say, actually, if you all can help us expand our political imagination, also what we might be able to do, not only in Israel, but in our own country. And so I think in this work, in sort of thinking across difference, across cultural difference, across identity difference, to say there's a lot that we can all be learning from each other. And so I want to thank you. We have some time for question and answer, for some questions. I know there are some folks on the Zoom that we're also going to be hearing questions from. Rabbi Baraha is going to help us out with the with the microphone handing around, but are there folks who have questions for Sally and Alon-Lee? As much as you can, so we can get in a number of questions, please ask questions and not statements, and speak directly into the mic so that the people on the Zoom can hear you.
So you said you find common ground, and but you said you needed to implement it. So what's the relationship other Israeli and Palestinian parties within Israel?
So just the question, what's the relationship between other Israeli and Palestinian NGOs and presumably parties as well in Israel? Thank you.
So yeah, that's actually a very important question, and it actually relates a lot to like NIF's work. Yeah, you know, standing together doesn't work in a vacuum. We have many partners. We are building an ecosystem. We're building an ecosystem that really helps us you know, also multiply our work, and actually we collaborate with many, you know, in the Green New Deal, we collaborate with other partners. We actually act as a grassroots, as a field, you know, agent for many organizations that might not have as much organizational capacity. We obviously collaborate on, you know, peace building efforts with the peace building organizations. We collaborate with you know, environmental organizations on climate issues. We really do, as a movement, and exactly because we are a movement, we really have a wide area of collaborations in our ecosystem. Yeah, it's very diverse, and it really is, what we really try to do is put it all together, and that's exactly the strength of our movement, and why we are growing so fast is because we have this holistic view. We are nonpartisan. Many of our, we are not affiliated with any party, and as we said, we really try to, we obviously have natural affiliated or alliances within the government, like Meretz, like the joint list in the parliament, like the joint list and Meretz, you know, but we also have a very diverse affiliation within our national leadership. You know, we really have people from that are affiliated, are actually active within different parties. We have 4 parliament members who are actually members of Standing Together, who actually also advance our work in the Knesset. So it really is, I think our holistic view is exactly why we work on so many different issues, and we have so many different partnerships. Does that answer your question?
Oh, do you have an active lobbying campaign?
We do not. We do not have an active lobby campaign. We do work more on grassroots, and obviously, you know, with the minimum 40, we actually had a bill, so we actually had to advance it. We have activists and MKs, members of Knesset, who are, you know, there, and we try to lobby. However, it's not our main work.
Great.
Thank you for coming all this way and spending time with us. Perhaps similar to the last question, trying to understand more of what you do. In your vision statement, you do talk about being a popular left. Otherwise, a lot of the words are what we'd call here kind of mom and apple pie, you know, all good stuff. But there's also maybe code that in Hebrew that doesn't show up in English. So just so there's one statement here about the automatic connection between identity and political affiliation. Just thought I'd push on that a little to try to understand what that's code for.
It's a good question, because I think that's what we're talking about, building a new majority in Israel. Because in Israel, the family or the town or the community you were born to is supposed to determine your political affiliation, your identity, your political identity. Mizrahi people in Israel are on the right wing, supposed to be, right? That's how it. There are Likud voters, Shas voters, and maybe other. The ex-Soviet Union citizen that made the Aliyah in the 90s, they are the voters of the right-wing Lieberman party. If you're from, high-income family, you will vote to the left, or to the, you have education, you will be in the elite, and so on and so on. And this sociological division in Israel is actually one of the worst diseases of Israeli politics, because it's not allowing us to find ways to bridge those gaps and to work to advance the Israeli society and to solve a lot of our problems. So the fight against different political parties in Israel is a fight of identity. It's like we as seculars, we cannot work with ultra-Orthodox because they're against us, and we as Ashkenazi, we need to, preserve our status quo because the Mizrahi wants to take our, academia works and stuff like that. But what we're trying to do is disconnect the automatic relations between your identity and your political stand, and to bring campaigns such as, our bill of Green New Deal to create new jobs in Israel that are transferring into green energy, into sustainable energy, and closing some sectors and moving people, or the minimum 40 campaign, which is not working for one sector, but it's actually helping people to expand the political imagination and feel that they can be part of a wider group and not only their sector. So we kind of reposition the political borders into a wider political us, and I think that's, yes.
So a lot of, the Haredi woman who is active with us on the minimum wage campaign, she probably won't vote for a leftist party in the next election. She won't. But what we try to do is challenge that automatic affiliation. I'm right wing, and if you statistically, if you ask any Mizrahi, Ethiopians, former USSR immigrants, these are all, first of all, these are all really marginalized minorities within, and actually not all minorities, marginalized communities within the Israeli Jews, and they are the ones who actually are supporting right-wing government that is not necessarily serving their interests. And I think what we really, try to do is to challenge their perspective and widen their political imagination into trying to see how it can actually be different. Obviously, it's not automatic, but we challenge it. By the division. Does that make sense?
Hi, we're joined tonight with several people on Zoom. That's the camera in the back, that black thing. You can wave to them. There's actually quite a significant number of people online, and I would like to ask some of their questions. One person asked, is Standing Together a Zionist organization?
I think that's an easy answer, is that it will have to be a no, because it's a Jewish Arab movement, and we will never ask a person to declare a Zionist before, if for example, it's not a Jewish person, to be a Zionist to join the movement, but we will not say that Standing Together is a movement that people cannot be Zionist in. We have a lot of members in the movement, actually, that are members of Zionist parties, Meretz, the labor. I think our leadership is combined by, we have like people that are members in 4 different political parties. Some of them are Zionists, some of them are Arab, and of course not Zionist. And I think Standing Together is trying to be this wide tent, a broad tent of people with different also ideologies, and understanding that we do need to create a new idea in Israel, a new ideology of equality. Is the current way of defining the nationality of Israel, that the national feeling of Israel is inclusive also to Palestinian citizens of Israel that, were born in this state and have no choice of whether they want to be Israeli citizens or not, but that's their home. I think it's a not inclusive ideology, and I think we should have an inclusive identity, inclusive equality in Israel. Israel must be the home of all the people that is living in it.
maybe there'll be a follow-up soon, we'll see. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask one more. Uh, what can we do in the United States to support you? That was one of the questions. And I'm going to then pass it on to someone else. I saw a donate button on your website earlier. I'm just like, I don't need to answer the question for you.
Subscribe. We will love to send you some updates on our.
We have like monthly newsletter. We
monthly
really
newsletter,
are
and
not
of course,
too.
if you want to make a donation, it will be very helpful to our work. But I would say that three things are important as we see it as American citizens. First of all, you are American citizen, and your country is, how to say it gently, supporting the continuance of the Israeli military control of the Palestinian people in West Bank and the siege on Gaza. The American aid for Israel is unconditional, and it is like a friend that is seeing us doing whatever we want, getting super drunk and keeping drinking and drinking and drinking, and the friend will not say, "You're drunk, go to sleep," but actually hand the next beer to us. And I think we do need to understand that Israel feels that this alliance with the US is something that we cherish a lot and has a high significance in Israeli politics. Like the alliance with the US is something strong. And I think you as American citizen can do something about the way your country is actually giving an oxygen line to us in actually preserving and deepening the Israeli occupation over Palestinians that are not Israeli. The second thing I think is to understand that we share realities in so many different ways. Prime Minister Netanyahu was re-elected for the second time in 2009. He invented then what later became the populist right-wing method that came to many different other rulers in the world, to Hungary and to Poland and to Berlusconi later and to Brazil and Donald Trump and Boris Johnson and all this all this populist right-wing agenda of turning communities against each other and telling, look behind you, the one that is beneath you in the social ladder, he's to blame for for you not having a job. People are losing factories or losing jobs in the Midwest in the US. Who's to blame? Is it the Mexicans or the immigrants? Or I don't know who the Muslims are the ones to blame. And this is something that we need to work and to understand how to recreate a society that is a healthy society, and understand we are in this together, and we need to create solutions to normal, daily problems that are serving us all. And I will say the third thing is like organizations like the NIF, organizations like J Street, and organizations in Israel that are coming to the US. We need the ability to share our story. What we feel a lot of time that has been seen on international media, in the US media. What we also felt in last May is that, Israel is a one blurb of racism, of war, of hatred and violence, and there's no complexity of having actually a society. But we have a society. We have people in Israel, and those people have, their own problems, and we have hopes and dreams, and we have disparities, and we have interests, and our government is not serving an interest. So differentiate or not differentiating between the Israeli government and the Israeli people, which is something no one does, is something we need to stop doing. We need to understand that it is Israeli society, and this society is not the government. This society is not the settlement. We need to tell this story. So
Exactly these kind of things, providing platforms where we can, shared society and organizations like standing together and our partners, we are navigating the complexities of like actually Palestinians and Jewish people trying to work it out, right? and it's, it doesn't really get any more, and this is the one part. There's so many other things, and there are many other stations and stops on the way, but this is the first one. And I think that the fact that we are trying to navigate these things and work it out, it needs to be heard. We feel like it's not as, it's often, at best overlooked, and even perhaps sometimes even not really something that is relevant. Thank you. I think, really providing this kind of platforms is very important, and we really hope that we will be able to do more of it for more organizations and really try and grow as an ecosystem in Israel so we could work better together. Yeah.
And we want to thank you, congregation, the temple, for having us. It's the beginning of our trip, but it is a very significant moment for us to be able to come here, especially after the last month in Israel, and to tell this story and to be able to share it. So thank you.
Very, very lucky to have you. I think there's one more question, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for being here. So you spoke several times about the student groups that are part of your organization, and students can either be very idealistic or cynical, and you have a whole menu of issues, environmental issues, economic issues, social issues, justice issues. And so I wondered if you could just talk briefly about what is it that attracts students to your movement, and what keeps them there.
I always say, our motto is where there's struggle, there's hope. I always say where there's students, there's hope. They are my favorite part of the whole thing. Campuses are really the first platform, the first space that, Arabs and Jews meet. We have segregated schools until high school, and then after high school, most Jewish youth go to the army, and most Arab youth go to the university, and that's where they meet Jewish people after the army. It really is a very interesting dynamic of the first clash. And I think, in earlier decades, I think campuses were an amazing hub of activism. Even like an Arab Jewish activism. It really was, Hadash, the party also had a very strong, and even, Palestinian parties as well, and Jewish parties, Meretz and the Labor, they really had a very active hub there, and it really, you could see it in the youth. And I think with time, these parties have lost grip on grassroots, and that with that came also the complete depoliticization of campuses. And what we try to do is really recreate that space. And our chapters, at the moment, we actually are the largest organized group that is represented within student unions. We are, we really try, we actually have a campaign towards next year for the national union. We really, our students are given a voice for the first time. And what attracts them, I think, is just the ability. What is organizing? I think there is a definition of organizing, providing the tools. What is it exactly? Marshall Gantz, the tools that, to give the people the tools to change the realities that they want to see, something like that. And I think that's exactly what we're giving our students. We are giving them, we have student organizers who actually are giving them the resources, the tools, so they could capitalize on the resources, amazing resources on campuses. It's a hub. It's literally one place where they can actually advance things. Our students work, they advance campaigns for direct employment of staff, of non-academic staff. They advance campaigns for safeguarding against sexual harassment. They advance campaigns for more representation of Arabic on campus. They represent minimum 40, minimum 40 and the Green New Deal, national campaigns that they translate into campuses. And during May, it was very difficult on our students, especially Arab students. Actually, there was the large majority of Arab students did not come back to campuses after May because it was so hostile for them to come back to campuses. Many of the dorms were marked, where Arab students lived, like it was marked. And students didn't come back, they just stayed home. And what our community does, and that's what I was saying, our chapters create a community, a support community. And what they did, they actually made a series of parties, just parties, and parties that were political, that were cultural, but they had a statement. And they invited the campus, the whole campus, and they actually made a public event to invite people to the party with a statement, with a political statement of Arab-Jewish partnership. And that gave such a value and such assurance, I think, to our students as a whole. And it really is our students are my biggest hope. I could talk about them for a while, so thank you for the question. But we really are also planning to expand more. You have the major universities, but you have periphery colleges that, smaller colleges in Israel, in Sderot, in the south, in the north. And these colleges, first of all, they have a larger community of, students from economic peripheries, people who are affiliated with right-wing, like Mizrahi Jews and religious Jews who are more affiliated with right-wing, and to be able to create a space where they can interact. Maybe not be part of, but like interact with a space that can actually, expand their horizon is something that we really, that's one of our major goals for the next couple of years.
We're out of time for tonight, but like I said, I hope that this is a conversation that we continue. Want to invite you back to Temple Micah anytime that you want, and just to say that. What a really good reminder for us. Where there's struggle, there is hope, but it's not naive hope, right? It's hope that takes a lot of work. It's hope that's about building capacity, about building resilience, about hope that is seeing the long view and still getting up and doing the work every day. So thank you all. We pray for your peace and your safe travels as you go on this next few-week journey. Zeidchem l'shalom, shuvchem l'shalom. May you go in peace and may you return in peace. Thank you.